The moment you start explaining yourself, you've already surrendered your power. Think about it. When someone questions your decision, challenges your authority, or attacks your character, what's your immediate instinct? To defend, to explain, to justify why you did what you did. You feel that pressure building in your chest, that desperate need to make them understand, that instinct. It's the invisible chain that keeps you submissive without you even realizing it. Every word you use to defend yourself transfers power directly to your accuser. Every explanation you offer is another brick in the prison you're building around your own status. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that modern society desperately tries to hide from you. Silence is not empty space, it's a weapon. And in the next 20 minutes I'll show you exactly how to weaponize it to command fear and respect simultaneously, without uttering a single word of defense. In 1513, Niccolo Machiavelli sat in exile, stripped of his position, tortured by the new regime, and politically destroyed. He had every reason to write a lengthy defense of his actions, to explain himself, to beg for understanding. Instead, he wrote The Prince, and never once did he justify himself. He simply presented power as it truly operates, without apology, without explanation. That choice is why we still speak his name 500 years later. Machiavelli recognized what modern self-help culture has completely inverted. The act of explanation is an act of submission. When you explain, you've accepted someone else's frame of reality. You've agreed that you owe them understanding. You've positioned yourself beneath their judgment. And here's what makes this truly insidious society has conditioned you to believe: that explaining yourself is virtuous. They call it communication, they call it transparency, they call it emotional intelligence. These are sophisticated terms for the same ancient mechanism, getting you to voluntarily dismantle your own authority. Watch what happens in any hierarchy. The subordinate always explains. The employee explains to the boss, never the reverse. The child explains to the parent. The accused explains to the judge. Explanation flows upwards through power structures. When you explain yourself to someone, you've just declared them your superior, even if no words explicitly said so. But there's something even darker about this pattern that we need to examine. The people demanding explanations from you aren't seeking understanding, they're seeking submission. They want to watch you perform subordination. They want to see you acknowledge their right to question you. The explanation itself is irrelevant. It's the act that matters. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, explain what you really are. He didn't say, justify your appearance. He understood that mystery creates more power than clarity ever could. Modern society has inverted this wisdom because a population that constantly explains itself, it's a population that's easy to control. If they can condition you to justify every decision, every boundary, every moment of authority, they've turned you into your own prison guard. You'll monitor yourself, question yourself, and diminish yourself without anyone else lifting a finger. You're about to learn the specific mechanisms Machiavelli identified for wielding silence as a dominance tool. But understand this: once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. You'll recognize them everywhere, in politics, in business, in your own relationships. You'll see exactly who commands respect and who begs for approval, simply by observing who speaks and who doesn't. The question isn't whether these dynamics exist. They do, whether you acknowledge them or not. The question is whether you'll position yourself as someone who understands power, or someone who remains subject to it. The principle of interpretive void. Silence forces others to fill the space with their own fears. Here's the first tactical principle. When you refuse to explain yourself, you create an interpretive void. And human psychology cannot tolerate a void. The other person's mind will immediately begin generating explanations. And here's the crucial part: those explanations will always be more intimidating than whatever you actually might have said. This works because of a specific mechanism in human neurology. The brain's primary function isn't happiness, it's survival through threat assessment. When someone doesn't explain themselves, your brain categorizes them as unpredictable, and unpredictability equals danger in the ancient circuits that still govern human behavior. Watch this principle in action through a concrete example. A senior executive at a Fortune 500 company was once challenged in a board meeting by a rising director who questioned his strategic decision publicly. Everyone in that room expected a defense, a justification, a detailed breakdown of the reasoning. Instead, the executive simply held eye contact for 4 seconds. then continued with the next agenda item as if the question had never been asked. What happened next revealed everything about power dynamics. The director who asked the question immediately began explaining himself, why he asked, what he meant, how he was just trying to understand. Within 30 seconds, he'd stalked himself into appearing insecure and overstepping. The executive never said a word against him. The director defeated himself by filling the silence the executive had created. Here's what was happening beneath the surface. The executive's silence communicated multiple messages simultaneously. It said, "Your question doesn't merit a response." It said, "I don't operate within a framework where I owe you explanations." It said, "I'm comfortable with your discomfort." But most powerfully, it said nothing, and that nothing allowed every person in that room to project their own interpretation onto it. Some board members interpreted as silence as supreme confidence. Others saw it as strategic restraint. A few recognized it as a dominance display, but all of them, regardless of interpretation, registered it as power. Because people who have to justify themselves are people who can be questioned. People who don't explain are people who operate above the level where questions apply. This is why Machiavelli advised princes to cultivate mystique rather than transparency. He wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can feel." When you explain, you give them something concrete to argue with, to dismantle, to find flaws in. When you remain silent, they can only see your composure and they'll feel the weight of their own inadequacy in demanding explanations you refuse to provide. Now, most people stop here. They try this once, feel uncomfortable with the silence, and immediately fill it themselves with nervous talking. But that's why they fail. The principle only works if you can tolerate the tension longer than the other person can. It's not enough to be silent, you must be comfortable in that silence. While they squirm, practice this in low-stakes situations first. When someone asks why you made a particular choice, where you ate lunch, what movie you watched, why you took a certain route, simply smile slightly and change the subject. Don't be rude, don't be aggressive. Just decline to enter the frame where you owe explanations for mundane decisions. You'll notice something immediately. People become more careful about questioning you. They recalibrate. They start to sense that you operate by different rules than they do. And that sensing, that recognition that you don't play by the standard social contract of endless justification, that's where respect begins to crystallize. But there's a second layer to this that goes even darker. Because silence isn't just about what you don't say. It's about what your silence forces them to reveal about themselves. The principle of inverted burden. Silence transfers the obligation to perform. Here's the second principle that builds on the first. When you remain silent in the face of demands for explanation, you reverse the burden of performance. Suddenly, the person demanding answers becomes the one who must fill the social space, manage the discomfort, and prove their legitimacy. This works through a darker psychological mechanism than most people realize. Social interaction operates on an unspoken contract. When someone asks, someone answers. When someone challenges, someone defends. These patterns are so deeply embedded that breaking them creates immediate psychological distress, but only for the person who expected you to comply. Let me show you this principle through a real scenario that plays out thousands of times daily across every hierarchy. A manager receives an email from a subordinate demanding to know why they weren't chosen for a promotion. The typical manager writes a detailed response explaining the selection criteria, the other candidates' qualifications, the strategic considerations. They spend an hour crafting this explanation, trying to be fair and thorough. Here's what my manager just did. They accepted a frame where they owed that explanation. They performed emotional labor for someone who has no authority to demand it. And most critically, they've taught that subordinate that demanding explanations will be rewarded with the manager's time and effort. Now observe the alternative. The manager responds with 8 words. The decision has been made. Moving forward now. Then silence. No justification. No detailed breakdown. No performance of fairness. What happens next is where the power dynamics become visible. The subordinate faces a choice. Accept the boundary, or reveal themselves as someone who believes they're entitled to explanations they're not actually owed. If they push further, they're the ones who now appear unreasonable. The manager never had to defend anything. The subordinate's continued demands become increasingly uncomfortable for them, not for the manager. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves." One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. The silence is the trap. Those who demand explanations you don't know are the wolves revealing themselves. If you're still watching, you're already ahead of 90% of viewers who clicked away because this makes them uncomfortable. They want to believe that endless explanation and justification is virtuous. They need to believe that power dynamics don't exist, that hierarchy is just a social construct we could abandon if we all agreed. You understand differently. You recognize that these dynamics operate whether we acknowledge them or not. Here's what makes this principle truly dangerous. It works in intimate relationships just as effectively as in professional hierarchies. When a romantic partner demands to know where you were, what you were thinking, why you made a choice, and you've done nothing wrong, nothing to betray trust, your willingness to endlessly explain is training them that your autonomy is subject to their interrogation. I'm not talking about accountability within agreements. If you've committed to monogamy, transparency about faithfulness is contractual. But that's different from the person who demands detailed explanations about your internal world, your thoughts, your reasons for normal autonomous decisions. When you comply with those demands, you're teaching them that you're subordinate. The powerful response is, "I'm not discussing this." Then silence. Then a subject change initiated by you. You've just communicated that you determine what's open for discussion, not them. You've maintained your frame. You've refused to perform for their emotional discomfort. But here's the part that most people miss. This only works if you're genuinely comfortable with the possibility that they won't accept your boundary. If you're using silence as a manipulation tactic while desperately hoping they'll back down, they'll sense a hidden negotiation. True power comes from being authentically okay with the consequences of maintaining your boundary. The next principle is where it gets truly dangerous. Because we're moving from defensive silence to offensive silence, using the absence of words to actively destabilize others. The principle of calculated opacity. Strategic silence creates interpretive chaos. The third principle escalates the stakes. You can use silence not just to refuse subordination, but to actively create confusion and anxiety in those who seek to control you. This is where silence transforms from shield to sword. Machiavelli observed that princes who revealed their full intentions could be easily countered by those intentions' enemies. But the prince who kept his own counsel, who left his true motives unclear, forced his opponents to prepare for multiple possible scenarios simultaneously, which meant they couldn't prepare effectively for any single one. This applies directly to your life in specific, concrete ways. Think about a negotiation for a salary, for a business deal. For any scenario where revealing your position early damages your leverage, the amateur speaks first. They explain what they want, why they want it, what they'd accept. They've just given away every strategic advantage. The professional sits in silence. When asked what salary they're seeking, they respond, "What range did you have in mind?" When pressed for their number, they smile and say, "I'd rather hear your best offer first." When pushed harder, they're comfortable with the stretched silence that follows, while the other party grows increasingly uncomfortable with the informational asymmetry they're experiencing. Here's the psychological warfare happening beneath that interaction. Every second of silence is a second where the other party is generating worst-case scenarios. Maybe they have another offer. Maybe their expectations are way higher than our range. Maybe we're about to insult them with our offer. Their mind is filling the void with interpretations that serve your interests, not theirs. Contrast this with what weak people do. They fill silence immediately. They over-explain. They make self-deprecating comments to ease tension. They essentially negotiate against themselves by revealing information without receiving anything in return. They volunteer their bottom line while the other party is still determining their strategy. What powerful people do, they become comfortable with conversational dead space. They recognize that silence creates pressure that builds on the other person, not on them. They understand that whoever speaks first in a negotiation typically loses, because speaking reveals position while silence reveals nothing. This is where you need to be careful, because this principle can be misused. There's a difference between strategic silence and stonewalling. Stonewalling refusing all communication. As punishment is manipulation born from weakness. It's the silent treatment from childhood, weaponized emotional withdrawal. That's not power, that's avoidance. Strategic silence is different. You're still present, you're still engaged. You're simply declining to fill space that others expect. You too, Phil. You're maintaining eye contact. You're visibly comfortable. You're just not performing the emotional or informational labor they're demanding. In a professional context, when someone passive-aggressively comments on your decision, strategic silence is maintaining your composure and continuing with your agenda without acknowledgement. You don't ignore them with anger, you operate as if their comment simply isn't significant enough to address. In social dynamics, when someone attempts to frame you as obligated to justify your choices, strategic silence is a calm "I'm not getting into that" followed by topic transition. You're not hiding, you're not running, you're simply declining to enter their frame. In conflict, when someone is baiting you for a reaction, trying to make you defensive, attempting to pull you into their emotional chaos, strategic silence is refusing the invitation entirely. You don't need to explain why. You're not engaging. Explanation would validate that you owe them engagement. This separates those who consume content from those who use knowledge as a weapon. Most people will understand these principles intellectually, but will lack the emotional discipline to execute them. When silence becomes uncomfortable, they'll break. When social pressure mounts, they'll cave. When someone expresses disappointment or frustration with their boundaries, they'll begin explaining and justifying. But knowing these principles isn't enough. You need to understand how they combine into something more powerful than any individual technique. The principle of authoritative absence. The less available you are, the more power you command. The fourth and most powerful principle. Silence extends beyond individual conversations into your overall availability and presence. Machiavelli never wrote this explicitly in The Prince, but it permeates every analysis of power he conducted. Scarcity creates value, and your words are the resource you control. This is forbidden knowledge because it inverts everything modern culture teaches about connection and availability. You've been conditioned to believe that constant communication is relationship maintenance, that immediate responses demonstrate respect, that availability equals professionalism. All of these are mechanisms to keep you accessible to those who but benefit from your accessibility. Watch how power actually operates. The CEO doesn't answer every email. The respected professor has limited office hours. The high-value consultant isn't available on demand, and their scarcity isn't accidentally, it's strategic. Because when your time and attention are scarce, they become valuable. When your words are rare, they carry weight. Here's what Machiavelli understood but couldn't explicitly state in his political climate. The prince who appeared at every event, who addressed every concern, who made himself constantly available, was perceived as desperate for approval. The prince who appeared selectively, who spoke rarely but powerfully, who maintained distance from the daily chaos, was perceived as operating at a higher level of strategic thinking. This manifests in your life through digital communication. The person who responds to texts within minutes, who's always available for calls, who constantly updates their social status, their broadcast abundance. Not abundance of time or success, but abundance of availability. And abundant things are cheap things. Contrast this with someone who responds thoughtfully but not immediately, who's genuinely busy with meaningful work, who doesn't feel obligated to maintain constant digital presence. They're communicating scarcity, and scarce attention is valuable attention. But here's where most people fail to implement this. They confuse strategic unavailability with playing games. They artificially delay responses to seem busy, but they're actually checking their phone every 5 minutes to see if someone responded. That's not power, that's insecurity masquerading as strategy. True implementation of this principle means genuinely building a life where your time and attention are allocated to high-value activities and communications from others. Genuinely urgent wait until you've completed your priorities. You're not pretending to be busy. You're not artificially creating scarcity. You're actually protecting your most valuable resource, focused attention on what matters to your objectives. Machiavelli wrote extensively about how princes must appear a certain way to the masses while operating differently in reality. But there's a deeper level. The most powerful princes weren't appearing to be anything, they simply were operating by different rules. And the masses interpreted that difference as mystique. When you integrate the previous 3 principles with this 4th one, here's what emerges. You refuse to explain yourself, which creates interpretive void. You don't fill social silences, which transfers the burden of performance to others. You strategically withhold information, which generates advantageous confusion. And you make your presence and words scarce, which elevates their value when you do engage. These aren't 4 separate tactics. They're 4 expressions of a single underlying reality. Power resides with those who are comfortable being misunderstood, who don't need approval, who operate by their own standards rather than seeking validation from others' standards. And here's what Machiavelli never explicitly wrote, but understood at a foundational level: the person who needs nothing from you has all the power in the relationship. Now let's synthesize how these principles work together as a unified system, for commanding respect and fear simultaneously. The foundation is understanding that communication is a battleground for frame control. Every interaction has a meta layer. Whose reality are we operating within? Whose standards determine what's acceptable? Who owes whom performance? When someone demands explanation and you provide it, you've accepted their frame. You've agreed that they have authority to question you. You've positioned yourself as subordinate. The explanation's content is irrelevant. The act itself is submission. When you respond with silence, you've imposed your frame. You've communicated that you operate by different rules. You've forced them to either accept your boundary or reveal themselves as someone who believes they're entitled to access your not granting. When you make your presence scarce and your words valuable through genuine priority management, you've created a context where your engagement becomes something others seek rather than something you offer. These principles working together create a compound effect. Each instance of refusing to over-explain trains others to expect less explanation from you. Each comfortable silence raises the social cost of demanding performance from you. Each strategic absence makes your presence more impactful when you do engage. Now, some will say this is manipulation. Some will call it Machiavellian in the pejorative sense. They'll claim it's antisocial, that it violates the social contract, that it's narcissistic or psychopathic. But power doesn't care about labels. These same people who will moralize about your boundaries are constantly violating boundaries themselves. They just use the language of concern, of connection, of caring to disguise their attempts to control you. They want you to keep explaining yourself because your explanations give them data to use against you, leverage to manipulate you, and confirmation that you consider yourself subordinate to their judgment. The reality check that no one wants. To acknowledge, the world is divided into players and pieces. Players understand the rules and use them strategically. Pieces believe the rules don't exist and wonder why they keep getting moved around the board by forces they can't identify. You can moralize about whether this should be true. You can wish for a world where power dynamics don't exist. But wishes don't change reality. The person across from you in a negotiation is using these principles whether or not you are. The colleague positioning for promotion is controlling their availability whether or not you do. The romantic partner testing boundaries is noticing whether you maintain frame, whether or not you're conscious of it. Which one will you be? The player who understands the game, or the piece who pretends the game isn't happening while others move you around the board? Here are 5 specific, actionable steps to implement these principles, starting with what you can do today and building toward advanced mastery. Step 1 today. Practice micro-silences in low-stakes conversations. When someone asks why you chose something mundane, your lunch order, your route to work, your preference in entertainment, resist the urge to explain. Smile slightly, acknowledge the question with just preferred it, and immediately redirect. How's your project going? You're training yourself to be comfortable, not justifying minor decisions. Step 2 this week. Implement response delays for non-urgent communication. Unless something is genuinely time-sensitive, wait at least 2 hours before responding to messages. Use that time for focused work on your priorities. You're training others that you're not on demand, and you're training yourself that delayed response doesn't create catastrophe. Step 3. This month, practice strategic silence in one challenging relationship. Identify someone who regularly demands explanations. You don't owe a colleague who questions your methods, a family member who criticizes your choices, a friend who interrogates your decisions. Next time they begin, respond once with a boundary. I'm not discussing this. Then hold silence, regardless of their reaction. You're establishing that certain topics aren't open for debate. Step 4. Next quarter. Engineer scarcity in one area of your life. Make yourself significantly less available in one domain. Perhaps you have limited office hours, when you discuss work after hours, or specific days when you're available for social plans. Protect the rest of your time fiercely for priorities that compound: skill development, strategic thinking, meaningful work. You're demonstrating through action that your time has value. Step 5. Ongoing mastery. Develop genuine comfort with being misunderstood. This is the advanced skill that makes all others possible. Meditate on this reality. Some people will interpret your boundaries as arrogance. Others will feel rejected by your unavailability. A few will resent your refusal to perform for their comfort, and that's acceptable. Your goal isn't universal approval, it's self-determined standards of success. When you genuinely stop needing others to understand your choices, you've achieved the mindset that makes these tactical principles effortless. You now know what 99% of people will never understand. Silence isn't empty. It's the space where power lives. You came into this video as someone who probably over-explains, who feels uncomfortable silences, who makes themselves too available because you've been taught that's virtuous. If you've watched this far, you now understand the machinery beneath. Those behaviors, how they transfer power away from you and toward anyone who's learned to demand explanations you don't actually owe. Most people will watch this and do nothing. They'll recognize the truth in these principles, feel uncomfortable with the implications, and then continue performing for others' approval because it feels safer than establishing boundaries. That's why they stay powerless. That's why they constantly feel like they're justifying their existence to people who have no authority over them. But you have a choice in this moment. You can close this video and return to the same patterns, continuing to leak power through excessive explanation and constant availability. Or you can implement these principles starting today, beginning with the smallest steps and building toward genuine mastery of frame control. If this resonates with the part of you that's exhausted from performing for others' comfort, that recognizes you've been giving away power you didn't know you possessed, subscribe. The content on this channel operates outside the boundaries of what mainstream self-help will tell you, because mainstream advice is designed to keep you manageable, not to make you powerful. The choice is yours. But remember, ignorance is not bliss, it's slavery. And now that you know these patterns, you can't unknow them. The only question is what you'll do with this knowledge.